to another episode of the motor build here, the Frankenstein Coyote build. If you guys are new to the channel, definitely consider subscribing. I really appreciate it. It all helps. And as you can tell, we've got exciting stuff going on. So just to refresh, this is a Gen 3 short block. We've got some Gen 2 heads over here, and that's going to be the focus today, is getting those mounted on the short block here. So without further ado, I'm not going to beat around the bush. Let's just get into it. To mount the Gen 2 heads today, we're going to be using some ARP head studs. Since this is a Gen 3 short block, they actually switched back to the 12mm head studs. So these are originally intended for 11 to 12 Coyotes, but they will also work for the Gen 3 Coyotes as well. So I went ahead and took a little bit of initiative off camera. I got the dowel pins mounted into the block here so that the heads are ready to drop onto the block. I also went ahead and cleaned up the mounting surfaces on the heads. There was some I don't know, some type of adhesive stuff, so I used a little bit of Goo Gone, and then of course I wiped it all down again with brake clean, so those are all now clean and ready to mount. But before we get into actually mounting the heads, I do have to take a minute and clean off all of the head studs. When ARP ships everything, they all have like an oil coating on the outside for protection or whatever, so we have to take a second, clean those all off, use a little bit of brake clean, just some towels. But otherwise, the mounting process should be actually pretty straightforward. It's just going to be dropping the heads on, making sure obviously our surfaces are nice and clean, ready to go, putting the fresh gaskets on, sliding on the heads, and then torquing down the bolts and everything, which is really not that complicated of a process. So let's get into it. All right, so it took, I don't know how long, but got all the head studs all cleaned up, as well as the washers and the nuts, as you can see on that towel there. It's pretty dirty. Definitely a lot of packing oil, more than I expected. So with that, I think after I clean up the mounting surfaces within the heads, I'll show you that in just a second, the heads are pretty much ready to go. All right, so let's install them. And look at that, we're done. Just kidding. If this were a real YouTube channel, that's probably how it would go, but we like to show the stuff that matters, so let's keep working. So this surface right here, it's like the smooth surface, that's where the washer and the head stud mounts into the heads. So I need to take some brake clean and a towel and wipe those up. But these cam caps kind of make it a little bit difficult to get in there, so I am going to go ahead and pull these off because they have to come off anyways for obviously installation of the cams. But thing to note, you want to make sure that you're very particular where you put these and keep yourself very organized, because they have a specific placement. You don't want to mix it up. So I'm going to be laying everything out as I disassemble to keep it organized, and that way I know where it needs to go as well as where it came from. Okay, so I wanted to take a quick second and kind of clarify what all is going on in terms of the motor and what all it is you need to know in regards to the heads. So in this shot, you can kind of see the underside of the head and how all the ports are routed for coolant and oil. Oil is the outer 6 passages. There's 3 on the bottom, 3 on the top. They're kind of like ovalish shapes, aside from like 1 or 2 towards the back. And then in the middle area around the valves and kind of where I guess you see like those triangular ports, those are for coolant. That kind of moves the coolant up and down around the cylinders and throughout the heads. So if you guys are familiar, MPR is the company that builds motors that originally put out the information in regards to the ports on the heads and the block not lining up in terms of the coolant passages. And so I called them to kind of try and get some clarification in regards to what coolant passages it was and if there was anything that could be done about it. I believe I spoke to a gentleman named Tim. I think he's the one that kind of owns and runs the company. He kind of explained to me that it was the coolant passages on the head where they're meeting the block, and that essentially they just don't have ports right in the same area as like the 2018 heads, whereas the 2018 head gaskets, they have like provisions for the different coolant ports on the heads and the block. And if you look at the block that you can kind of see in this shot here, the area around the cylinders, that's all totally opened up now, and that allows coolant to pass through, whereas on like a Gen 2 or Gen 1 block, you only really have those little kind of rectangular areas at the top and bottom of the cylinder, whereas the 18, you have like almost all of that area opened up, aside from, you know, right at the top kind of center areas, you have those little webbings that kind of help support and provide structure and strength to the cylinder walls. So when I was originally looking at all this, I was misunderstanding that the lower 3 oil ports, I thought those were coolant, so I was looking at getting those tapered out to match the block. I kind of got to a point where I was getting confused and frustrated and just kind of tired at looking information, So I just decided that I wasn't going to worry about trying to match the ports on the heads to the block. NPR did say that you could kind of taper out the coolant passages on the heads to match the block, and that it would essentially eliminate the concerns with the coolant flow. And they said they would do it for like 150 bucks, which isn't terrible, honestly. Probably like an hour or two of machine time. So if anyone's worried about it and wanted to address the coolant passages lining up with the block, you can send it off to NPR. They'll kind of taper those ports so that it matches similar to what the 2018 block should have, and you can kind of go from there. However, I decided to not worry about it just because I'm familiar with a few people that have run the motor before, so I'm not the first one, but I did want to just kind of put it together as is. So if anyone was worried about it and didn't want to send it off for tapering, just to kind of see, how the motor holds up as is. And the other thing to note is I am running Boss 302 head gaskets. So I was originally under the assumption that I had bought the engine gasket kit for a 2015 Mustang, but it turns out it was actually a Boss 302 Mustang engine gasket kit. And the only really difference between the two would be the head gaskets. And typically what you want to do is you want to run the head gasket based on the gen heads that you run. So if you run Gen 2 heads, you should run Gen 2 head gaskets, Gen 1, etc. The only real difference between the head gaskets from Gen 1 to Gen 2 is the oiling port at the front of the motor. The Gen 1 has a smaller oiling port, whereas the Gen 2 has an opened up oiling port. What I ended up actually doing is taking my Boss 302 head gaskets and opening up that oil port on the head gasket. I just kind of used a step drill bit, not necessarily like the most conventional, but I did a nice clean cut on it and opened it up to match the oiling port on the block and the heads. So with that modification in the head gaskets and deciding not to worry about the coolant passages, I just ended up kind of going, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. We're just going to put this bad boy together and kind of see what happens. That's the gist of everything that kind of went on, and hopefully that helps clarify some of the information in terms of the concerns and the confusion with the setup as far as the compatibility between the heads and the block. So at this point, I just kind of ended up putting the motor together, and that's where we're going to kind of jump back into things. So I gave the heads one last good wipe down, and we're going to go ahead and put these on the block and start assembling with our head studs. Scared the shit out of me. So before I get these studs all snugged down, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and start the nuts and washers on each of these head studs. And you just want to put a little bit of lube on the bottom side of the nut where it meets the washer. So just a little dab. So I'm just going to throw this on there, get it nice and started. And then this can go into place. And I'll snug that down with the Allen key. Alright, so with all these in, we're just going to snug down the studs, and then we can start torquing down the nuts after that. So all of the head studs are now in place. The nuts are on top. We've got lube on the threads and the bottoms of the nuts where it meets the washer. So now we're just going to go ahead and snug down each of the nuts like so in the standard sequence, at which point, once they're all hand tight, I will transition to the torque process. Pretty standard. You start from the middle, work your way out. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and that's your sequence. So following that same process I just told you in terms of the sequence, we're going to go 40 foot-pounds, 80 foot-pounds, and then 125, and then that's it. Alright, that was 40. We're gonna jump up to 80. Alright, last round. And this is for 125. Which is gonna be kind of difficult. We're gonna sweat now. Whew. Okay. So that's torquing down the head studs. I still have to do the other side, so I think I'm just gonna do that off camera. You guys get the idea. You watched me struggle enough. I'll do that and come back. That's it. I am beat, dude. That's fucking difficult. Problem is my floor is really nice, so the freaking stand keeps trying to roll around. So ideally, if you have a way to keep your stand from moving, you'll definitely want that. Alright guys, so with that, we almost have a complete long block. The next steps are to go ahead and start putting the cams into place. But I think given that this video is probably already fairly long, kind of going through the head stuff, the potential issues there, which I realized that those outer ports are actually not coolant ports, but oiling ports. So I'm assuming the coolant issue ends up being with closer to the middle, around the cylinders and stuff. That being said, I'm not really super worried about it. I think we're just gonna go ahead and send it and see what happens. There's still plenty of travel between the coolant ports and the heads and the head gaskets, so I'm thinking we're just gonna see what happens, and so we'll cross our fingers that this lasts for a long time. But that's gonna do it for this video, guys. So hopefully you've been enjoying the Frankenstein Coyote build. It's been informative. You've been excited with everything that's been going on as far as where we're going. So I know I am. Definitely hit that like button if you are enjoying the series so far. Feel free to subscribe if you're new here. And I think I will catch you guys in the next video when we start to tackle the cams and all the timing. Peace out. I'll catch you next time. I'm already aware that it's gonna suck to go through. So fuck you, Brian.